We're back with The Curious Leader with Coby Karl. This is Brett Goldberg. We're here with special guest, Coach Phil Jackson. Part two of a two-part conversation. We talked about authenticity.
Yeah.
And Coby, we're going to talk about compassion. This is the topic that you've said with Coach Jackson is where maybe he's had the most influence on you.
Yeah.
And so we had to pick it. We had to go here. Out of all the places, hi Coach Jackson, out of all the places we could go, maybe this is the one that's most influential to you, Coby. Just expand on that for a second.
Yeah, I mean, Coach, you've talked a lot about your upbringing in the church. My upbringing was in the game of basketball, and that competitiveness and that toughness that's created. You talked about a pro athlete. I was almost a warrior in a way, just the way they build up armor, and I saw that in my life at a really deep level, and it took me a long time to kind of realize to accept the other side of myself, and that being self-acceptance, gratitude, some of these, I guess, for lack of a better term that I can come up with right now, is these softer skills, like to build that depth internally within myself. So compassion, I think, is not talked about enough, and it's something you talked about in our first talk about, just recognizing the different types of leadership. Like that observation that we've seen in the harder, tougher militaristic approach to leadership versus the relational, really meeting that person where they are and connecting to them in that sense. While my dad did that in a different way, I'd never really been exposed to compassion and self-compassion in that deeper sense. So that's kind of where it was for me.
Coach Jackson, where does compassion originate from you? Is it in your father? Is it in understanding and studying Buddhism and where that melds with your Christianity and Christian roots? What is the beginning of this one for you?
Well, I mean, I think it's obviously has resonance in my father as a pastor. Hearing, kids come in school and say, your dad dropped by my grandmother's room in the hospital and asked if she wanted him to pray with her. It was really nice of him to stop by. And, that's one of the things my father would do. He'd visit the jails, he'd go to the hospital and see if people wanted to have some kind of a conversation. In sports, it was all a different way. It was very much, we're coming out of a militaristic community in, the 50s. The Korean War actually was part of the 50s, and the Vietnam War was part of the 60s. And there was a lot of similarities between, a coach and a military leader. And, we all watched, various programs or movies that showed this characteristic that was kind of redeeming as a leader. Here's a story that kind of relates to my evolution as a coach. I always had these feelings of, understanding, my roommate when I was with the Knicks was Bill Bradley. He wrote Life on the Run, a book that was a really interesting book about playing with the Knicks and about the various kids that came out of their communities to become an NBA basketball player. And a lot of sympathetic stories about the African-American kids that we had on our team. In-depth stories that were, quite obviously compassionate in their sense and the history of it. And so, there was always that, okay, it's great. These kids are here, but now you're in the game. Now you're playing. Now you're one of the soldiers, and you got to face what, your rank includes. So, both of my assistant coaches that I chose to keep after I assumed the role of head coach from an assistant coach was Johnny Bach. He was an ensign in the Navy in World War II, and Tex Winter, who was a flight and an ensign in the Navy in World War II. They were both very different characters. Johnny was very much in the military being and liked to, Douglas MacArthur was one of his heroes. People don't know about Douglas MacArthur. He is one of the great generals that we had, a great leader. Guy that came back to the Philippines to recapture it after getting run off the Philippines. And, using the whole strategy in the Pacific about coming back and taking the Philippines back again. Said, I will return, and did. And we were in, preseason, my first year as a head coach. Guys were out in the court practicing. We had a small gym that was really on a tennis court in a place called the Multiplex in Chicago. And they had an indoor tennis court that they gave to the Bulls, or the Bulls rented, and made a basketball court out of it. And the distance and the baseline was our offices. So our office was right there by the court. You opened the door and stepped out in the court. Next door was a training room, and that was it. And there was a little video room for 15 people, players and 3 coaches. And Johnny said, you know what, Phil, I think you need to have a whipping boy. I think you need to have someone on the team that you can use to inspire the rest of the team. I mean, I said, well, I know, because Red Holtzman used me a lot as a whipping boy. And I was an easy target to use, too. And, he'd get after me in a game like, leave the referees alone or whatever. Hey, but he made a bad call, I'd say. And then Bushard pulled me. Don't ever challenge him. It just makes it matter. Just go along with it. If he says, yeah, just say, yeah, okay, coach. Anyway, Johnny goes on, I got the perfect candidate for you. I'm going to bring him on. He's right outside here. He's just been shooting around. So he brings in Horace Grant. Coby's laughing because he probably knows the story. So Horace is there, and Horace has a twin brother. And they split up in college. One went to Oklahoma, one stayed at Clemson. And Johnny saw Clemson play North Carolina, and they were looking at Joe Wolf as a draft pick and kept saying, Horace Grant's the guy to choose, not Joe Wolf. Joe's a fine player, but Horace is really a superior athlete. It looks like he's going to grow into a 6'10" body, and he's going to be probably a really good NBA player. And that was a conflict that went on between scouting and our coaching staff and Jerry Krause. And Krause ultimately chose Horace Grant, even though it hurt him to do so because he's a North Carolina guy. So Horace was, there as a rookie when I came to be an assistant coach. I knew who Horace was. I didn't influence Doug Collins to use him at the end of a game situation because they were overplaying Michael so much. I said, go to Horace. He's got a nice game. He's got a little inside jump hook that's great. He'll be wide open when Michael comes off his pick. Anyway, Horace had elevated into a starter as we had traded Charles Oakley to the New York Knicks for Bill Cartwright, which gave Horace a starting role as a power forward. So anyway, Horace comes in. Johnny interviews him. Horace, what would you rather be if you weren't an NBA player? A Marine, sir. Just like that, he says. Right, Horace. Why? Because I like to serve my country. It's a military voice. He's got the whole thing. He's got everything going on. Coach Jackson needs to have a whipping boy. Would you be willing to stand up and take that role on? Yes, sir. You know I would. I'm like, where does this come out of? So he's got a relationship with Johnny Bach, who helped draft him. That's this whole bit about being a good soldier. So over the course of the next 2 years, Horace Grant is someone that if we weren't playing and whatever going the right way, I would jump in Horace's. Horace, Why are you so slow recovering out there or something? We need to get going. John Paxson, Bill Cartwright, Scottie Pippen, Michael Jordan. We got our older statesmen and Paxson and Cartwright. They're doing their job as best they can do. They're pervious to that. Scotty once in a while goes off the deep end. Michael might shoot too much or try to do too much, but challenging them, probably not a good idea for the team morale. So Horace becomes like, we get into playoffs. It's a tough year. Scottie Pippen's father died. He's not in a series against Philadelphia during the playoffs. He's missing a weekend. And we're taking them on in a short 5-game series, I think it is. And it is a 7-game, it's a possible 7-game series. It's the second round. I think we end up winning it in 5. But we go in and they have Armand Gilliam, an All-American player, at power forward, and Charles Barkley at small forward. And when they take Armand Gilliam out, Charles moves to power forward. So now Horace is playing Armand Gilliam, who's a power player personified, 250, 260, big, powerful guy. And then when he goes out, then it's Charles Barkley that Horace has to guard. And it's a big change. He goes from physical player to one that's much more mobile and active. And he's having a bad night. And I'm getting on him. And he breaks down and starts crying on the bench. Next day, I call him in the office, apologize for getting on him about his play and whatnot. And coincidentally, during this time, one of my former players that I had coached and had really replaced as a player, I was assistant coach in New Jersey Nets, and a guy named Rich Kelly, Kelley, Stanford, first pick by the New Orleans Saints, was one of the guys on the team that I befriended as assistant coach. Still a friend of mine. Rich was going to get an MBA at Stanford, and he had this professor, whose name was Jim Thompson, who had this book called Positive Coaching was the name of his book. It wasn't a book yet. He sent me a copy. Maybe you want to put a blurb on this, that for every correction, 5 compliments, 5 positive things you give. And this guy was coaching his junior high kid himself, and saw what was happening to kids of that age. And ultimately, Jim Thompson started something called the Positive Coaching Alliance, which, I was a spokesman for, 15 years for that group. But anyway, that book.
One of our sponsors too, by the way.
Oh, good for them.
Yeah.
So there it was. The book was there, and I had just gone through a situation where I was using someone as a whipping boy. And so I apologized to Horace, said, I think our roles have to change. And, I think we're going to throw out that whipping boy aspect of it. And, we're going to get back into, coaching in person. Now, I found out that weekend, Horace, we stayed at the Four Seasons in Philadelphia. Right across the street was I think, Episcopal church. And around the Episcopal church were some tents and some homeless people. And one of them approached Horace, and he'd ended up bringing the guy back to his room, buying him a dinner, and allowing him to sleep and shower in his room, which is Horace, the compassionate player who wanted to be a militaristic Marine, which was typical of his character, the big-hearted guy. So, I saw someone that didn't need to have this role at all. In fact, the other role was probably a bigger effect for him, was to have a compassionate coach that was like, well, one of the things about Horace is that Horace or Harvey, when they played against each other, never played against each other. So when we pull into Washington, we'd be playing the Bullets or the Wizards. And either Harvey was sick or Horace was sick. They didn't play against each other. They didn't want to have to compete that level against each other. So we used to kid Horace all the time about, oh, well, your brother's going to be playing. Is your brother playing? Or are you playing? Who's playing tonight when we get there? No, I'm going to play. So there was a few times they played together on the same floor, but it didn't seem like it. It seemed like there was always a day off in that regard. But it taught me something about how to be still a disciplinarian and still firm, and yet finding ways to be complimentary. And doing that had to be something that had to be like, you know, well, you gave your teammate a nice high five. Or, let's see, you took the ball out of bounds really well. But at the other end, you're screwing up. Well, what does the player hear? He hears that one negative thing against 5. You could say 10 positive things, and the one negative thing is going to be what the player hears and sees. So I learned a lot of other lessons from that Positive Coaching Alliance besides just the positive comments that you have to make. And some of them about rules and abiding by the rules and support by fans and the other things that Positive Coaching Alliance has done very well. But always about players. How do you find the complimentary things about all players? You just really can't. But you have to mitigate. You have to make your comments about them and their game acceptable to them. You know, like I've heard a lot of things that are hilarious about coaches' interactions with players coming off the floor and saying, you know, you're really hurting us tonight out there, buddy. Yeah, I know, coach, you are too, or something like that, you know, when they're coming off the floor. But there's always the comment about Larry Brown saying that whenever he took out Iverson would go by him and say, MF him as his way by. Get me in the game again, coach. You MFer. And, you know, we've all had that conflicts between players that want their will to be done or that themselves out there, but understanding the reasons why and going beyond that first level of whatever aggression or whatever is very important. And for me, it was important to see that that role, that horizontal role, that's militaristic, vertical role, has to be much more level. And that you're not on the same plane. We're not all the same, you know, have authority for the team. The win-losses are what constitute what's coaching about. But you have to elicit cooperation between the players and what they're doing so that you can delve deeper into what makes them perform the best they can perform. And until you're willing to analyze that character, the characteristics, or how they best respond, takes a compassionate side. Doesn't mean that you know, the hugs and the high fives. I mean, there's a lot of times when I, you know, would meet players for the first time and they'd come in for a hug and I would go like, okay, let's just shake hands until we get to know each other. Then we can go for the big hugs, right? That's kind of where I'm at as a man. Let's shake hands here and let's see where we stand with each other and, you know, how our roles are going to be. And then, you know, when we get that coordination and that cooperation, then we can come in for the hugs.
How do you think about compassion? And maybe it's a question for coach or you, but you as a coach too. How do you think about that softer element of compassion when blended with some of those firmer, harder, not to gentrify it too much, but discipline and things? What's what's been your conversations about that? How do you think about in terms of maximizing the balance?
One thing I've learned through our conversations and then watching the way that you coached us when I was with you guys and watching The Last Dance and all these things is it's just this understanding the human. And that's the journey that I've been on with your help, is understanding myself better. And then once I can understand myself at a deeper level, then I can start to understand my players at a deeper level. And then one thing through my reflections as a leader is, and you've talked to me a lot about this, is that hardness that is necessary to create the success that is necessary, or that is our goal at the end, and that accountability. And yes, there's a necessity for these difficult situations and hard ones, but that doesn't ever take away from knowing that this, like, I care for this person first. And you talked about that, bringing groups together to make sure that they know that your intention is for the betterment of them and the group. And I think that's a very fine line that can be misperceived by an athlete. That today, more than ever, our athletes are more sensitive and in a reactionary state from social media and their exposure at such a young age. But, that's the lessons I've learned. I remember the word that came to mind is non-judgmental awareness again, and acceptance. And I remember we were at the Toyota Center in the film room, and you just stopped us for a second and brought to the attention as a group the specifics to, Derek, after you get scored on, we know that you're going to attack your defender, or, Coby, if there's a bad call, we know that you're going to react in this negative manner. And you didn't say it in a judgmental way, but it was just to build awareness. And I felt like that was the most unique, compassionate thing that you can do for players, to help them build awareness and help your team build awareness, so you can grow from that place. Until we accept where we are, we can't grow. So long-winded, but that's where I've ended up in my coaching career, is just, you got to take that line, and it's difficult sometimes, but it can be the most compassionate action as well.
Yeah, I think that, there's so many ways that you get an opportunity to show that. The simple act of, I never wanted to call players. I never wanted to intrude on their private life. They have a responsibility to give their cell numbers up to the team. And, I'd say to maybe, my assistant that, give this guy a call and ask him where he's at. He's late to practice. And just let him know that I'm interested in knowing what's going on, but I'm not going to make that call. That's not my call to make. But I'm not going to intrude on his personal life here now to do something, unless there's a need. This is a call needed. Seeing a guy in pain, seeing a guy with an injury, having faced an injury myself that's limited my play for half a season, was one of the toughest things for me as a player. And my coach, Red Holzman, brought me in to the conversation because he wanted me to be there. He wanted me to be on the bench. He wanted me to be part of the team. So at game time, players would go out and there'd be 15 minutes left before he'd go out to the court. And so he'd be like, well, what do you think about this team? What do you think about this group? And it'd bring me into the conversation. And I would have Billy say, well, what do you see? What do you see as a coach? What do we have to look forward to here as a game? And he'd go like something like, well, it's not rocket science. It's about simple stuff. Who's going to stand in front of, Will Chamberlain? Who's going to push him off the block? Who's willing to make a stand out there tonight? Do we have the fortitude to do that? We're coming off a tough road trip. This is 3 games in 3 nights. That's what we'd play. That's going to be difficult physically for you to get for. And he said, "Well, what do you see out there as a?" And I said, like, well, I think we gotta watch out for Elgin Baylor, or we gotta watch out for Jerry West, or he said, well, maybe it's not about holding the Stars down, but come on, let's go out and see the game. And then we go out and see the game. So I got this impression, and then a lot of times he would he would ask me my opinion, and ultimately when I came back and started playing, even though I was said in this little podcast we were doing that I was a whippy boy at times, I was the guy that he would say, yeah, Phil, go up and diagram what you said about this team, what their favorite play is. Well, okay, I've got all these other guys that are starters like coming off the bench. I go diagram something on the board about, okay, this is what Goodrich does all the time, or some player that's unique, because this guy never diagrammed everything. I think he never wanted to diagram anything. I saw him move salt shakers around on the table, but it was kind of to bring me in also. But he also saw that I saw the game conceptually. Mm-hmm. And some players are like that, and some players can't see out of their own tunnel vision. And as a player, I understood that as a coach, he saw that in his group of players. So we'd be flying into a team, maybe a couple games on the road. We'd be flying in, day off. What do you think? Should we go practice, guys? How do you feel about it? We had a couple games. Think we should go practice? Bill, what do you think? Coach, I think we're tired. We need to. Dave, how about you? What do you think we should do? I think we should practice. So, Coach, I've been watching you ask over the years players about what they think about practicing when on the road. What's your cue? Well, how do you do that? Because sometimes it seems to me if I go by and I ask the busher if we should practice or shouldn't practice, and he said we should practice, I know that we shouldn't practice. But if he says, no, I don't think we should practice, I think we should practice. So there was a guy that had an understanding of his players in a way in which he knew how to deal with this aspect of what's the workload that the sympathizing with players. Fortunately, Red played the game. He knew the game and played it. That one of the things you have to do is understand the load physically that these players carry, and that they have a private life too, and that they have other things that are weighing in on them. The rumors that are going behind, or the innuendos they have to face in the press, or whatever. And that coach has to weigh all those things in the process of making judgments about a player. And if you're just looking at, well, we lost by 20 points. I want to get out there and make these players understand that we can't lose. And so we're going to do something like, one time Bill Russell coached a team that he would make them run how many laps they lost by. So they lost by 20 points. They go out and run 20 laps. And, ultimately that's a descending, that doesn't work. If, players can, then you got to say, okay, how fast you make them run. And do they run around the court, or they run on the inside of the court? All these type of things. But, understanding that a player's mentally has to be handled or coddled or promoted or pricked or urged or forced to face a physical challenge. And so you got two things going on at once there. With Dave DeBuscher, Dave might have been out and had 10 beers the night before, and that's why he didn't want to practice. And Red said, no, that'll be good to practice. Get that sweat out, get it out of your system. But he also knew that there's the mental challenge that goes into a player that's at 30 years of age that's working with. I've been doing this for 10 years now, and physically my body's hurt or hurting. So those are things that you're dealing with. But then there's that's just from a basketball standpoint. Then there's the other area that you're dealing with. It's a whole nother level.
Speaking of whole nother levels, let me ask you about something, and I think this has been so many stories of compassion interwoven throughout your coaching career and elsewhere. I've had the question since watching The Last Dance back a few months ago. If you had compassion, or maybe it was gratitude, or other emotions and sentiments in this way towards Jerry Krause, towards some of the executives that you may have worked with, say, the Bulls or the Lakers, in terms of understanding their challenges, empathizing with their challenges. You're going to fire me at the end of this season, no matter, even if we go 82-0. And Doc Rivers recently, I think, with Ramona Shelburne, said how infuriating that would make almost any person. But did you find compassion or similar sentiments in terms of understanding where, say, Jerry might have been in that example?
As recently as this summer, I talked with Jerry Reinsdorf. He still wanted to bring up some of that. I'm being blamed for that, for disbanding that team, or for not continuing on to see if we could have won another championship. And reality is, of course, is that, even if we would have said, yes, Michael, cut his finger that year and on a cigar clipper, I was like, how do you do that? Do you stick your finger in the cigar clipper and then is it like a guillotine? Anyway. So anyway, we had a few laughs about it, but I said, I wanted Jerry to have the opportunity to do what he wanted to do, and that is rebuild a team. He was talking about it for a long time. Not only that, he had curried the favor of Tim Floyd, who was the coach he was going to bring in, and Tim Floyd was there in the wings waiting to come in. I also knew there's only a certain amount of time that one coach can talk to one team without running out of room at some level with their patience or the message you have. So there's a number of things that go into all that stuff, but the biggest thing is that I understood it was the right time to end. Jerry and I never had that moment of relief until Tex Winter went in the Hall of Fame, and we were both sitting together and watching the proceedings. I had to go on stage for the actual induction of Tex into the Hall of Fame, but Jerry was there, and I congratulated him because that was one of the things he wanted to do. He wanted to elevate Tex's status from just a assistant coach in the NBA to someone that belonged in the Hall of Fame for his dedication to the game. And I understood that that was where Jerry was from, the dedication to the game, the idea of the game being played in its purest form. And one of the things that was difficult for Jerry is that he didn't draft Michael Jordan. And he was the person that was the notorious Michael Jordan and his Chicago Bulls. But he had all those and Chicago Bulls were people that Jerry Krause had put together in that. And as I've gone through even my little segment of time with the New York Knicks, in a limited amount of influence that you can have in these days in building a roster, a lot of the stuff was reminiscent of what Jerry Krause had implemented and done to scouting or judging character to building a team and how to build a team the right way. So yes, there is that. A lot of understanding for the weird things that happen in the sport. You're faced with an uphill battle, or you're faced with challenges that are beyond your control. And that most likely being receptive is going to be the best way to go about it, rather than being, armoring yourself and going out to make things happen. It was like we'd have a conflict, and some of the things with Jerry was Jerry liked to have issues. Jerry Krause liked to have issues, liked to have a little bit of conflict, or liked to have decisions that, well, we got to make a decision. And Reinsdorf, in my conversations with him on these things, would always say, sometimes decisions are just made. If you sit back and you allow things to take time, they're just made on their own. Time settles an issue. And so you have to back down from being the one that makes or has control to allowing things to happen on their own, from their own nature. And so that's the polarity, I think, that we're talking about here, is that how do you find that balance between the aggressive nature that you have to make things happen, to be aggressive, to be competitive, and then the other aspect of it is to be receptive so that you can intuit. And I think that's where we come to compassion. That's really an interesting part of it, is intuition. And I think that one of the greatest gifts that a person can have is to be able to listen and have that space where they can intuit, and they can hear that voice, or that voice of inner voice that's saying, let's pay attention to this, or let's give this some credence, or let's hear what this is all about. And that's just being in the moment, just being here now.
It's compassion to me, and like even hearing you talk about that conversation where if someone comes to you as a competitor and says, no matter what you do, you won't have any more chances. Like growing up around my father, competition was primary. And like he said about Doc Rivers, it just invokes this, like it invokes the ego or that combativeness within. And I'm curious, did you have any of that, or maybe where did that lack of reactiveness come from?
No, I think other people wanted to gin it up in me, wanted me to be affronted or taken umbrage to it. But I didn't take the bait. I don't know why that. I don't know where that is. Mm-hmm. I don't know why that is part of it. Maybe it's from my father. My father was a superintendent of churches in the state of Montana, and there was a whole movement that was trying to do things that were different. And my father was like, okay, the will of the group is more important than what my leadership is here, because there's a movement. They wanted to move the headquarters from, say, Great Falls to Billings. And, my dad said, well, that's not really centralized to what the state of Montana is. If you know the state of Montana, it's like massive. It's like Texas, California, that, okay, Billings is on the southeast side of the state, and everything else is over here. Missoula and Helena and Butte and Kalispell and, all these other cities are in the mountain ranges. And my dad was like, accessibility to these 75 churches or so, or 100 churches that were in the state. But he accepted it, and he actually said, it's really good to go back to being a minister and a pastor and I never heard him complain at all about it,
Mm-hmm.
or about whatever that was, a demotion, or whether it felt like a demotion to him. And so I think that example was probably a good example to
Absolutely.
me.
Truly a commitment to the team, maybe in the bull sense. Coach recognizing sort of the Jerry might have some of his own goals.
Mm.
It might be better for the team to take on a new identity. These things are greater than me, so let's let those greater forces prevail. I think one of my greatest interests in this subject, and then I think those that are becoming leaders of their respective organizations, you embrace compassion, you understand it, and if you have a relatively high emotional intelligence, some of what you're describing makes a lot of sense. I think how to make it actionable maybe is my last area to delve into here with you. We have, as I mentioned, a Navy SEAL that provides some advice to us from time to time, and I asked him this question recently, and he said the answer for him is, when faced with a difficult situation, an adverse situation, he asks himself the question, how would love handle this situation? And I think that is not only interesting in terms of personifying love and putting it into that situation, but making it actionable. I would ask the same thing to you. How do you make compassion or compassionate leadership actionable?
Well, the simple answer is just to take a breath. It's as simple as that. It's only about breathing, because when we breathe, I have a teacher that says breath clears mind. So when we breathe, it takes whatever our own selfish desires, greed, envy, whatever else is, right out with it. And then we can be in that moment. And, that gives you the opportunity. Doesn't mean that you're going to be compassionate, but gives you the opportunity to feel what the necessary emotion is for this situation. And I think that that's the one lesson that is the most difficult, but yet the easiest one to understand. It's most difficult to do, but easiest one to understand. We were always called as kids, right? Count to 10 before you react. So it's similar to that. It's not counting to 10, it's taking a breath and allowing the moment to dictate what it means to you.
You talked earlier about space, like giving a player space or a person space. To me, that sounds very similar, of giving yourself space to feel, to intuit what the moment is asking for. Within like young leaders within our world right now, sometimes that the world is speeding up too much. Is there anything other than just the breath, like giving yourself that space to give others space as well? Is there anything else when it comes to compassion that, maybe cultivating it outside of your work so you can have that space, give others space? How do you create that space within you?
I would say listen to Opus 131 of Beethoven's string quartets. Will give you that space.
Very specific.
If you're listening to rap, no, you're not probably going to get into that space. But if you're wanting to set an opportunity for yourself to be comfortable, well, I don't know, serenity may not be the word that goes along with this, but something like that.
Yeah.
Which, I think we have so many tools for us to use at this particular time. You could turn on a Headspace on your phone. You can turn on music on your phone. You can do whatever, a YouTube video that may get you energized. You may have a podcast that maybe speak to you. But until you're willing to be in that space where you are alone and you are silent and you are listening and you do take a breath to clear your mind and you try to be in that moment for that particular aspect of training that you're doing as a coach or as a leader, as a person of conscious realization, then you understand what I'm saying, because that's really the key. You can go out on a limb and just try to create something, use humor, use some snap judgment, but sometimes it just takes sitting back and maybe crying with the person that you're with. I've seen that happen. Cutting a player in the CBA from a team that makes $320 a week as a salary, and a kid falling on the floor and just being bereft in agony about not making that team. All you can do is just be sympathetic to this desire, this person that wants to do what he believes his life should all be about, basketball. And they say, well, it's just a game. But here it is, putting someone on the floor over the fact that he's not made a team, and how to handle that situation that's so unusual.
Yeah.
That just challenges you as a coach to.
What's cool about what Coach is saying right now is this is transformative thinking, in the sense of it spans generations. It spans what may come as far as gaming or social media or the next thing after that. It is about being present with yourself, allowing space to take over through that presence, and then being caring towards the people you're interacting with, whether you absolutely understand their plight or not. You understand what it means to have your dreams thrown off. You understand what it means to be challenged. And those are very boundless in terms of what those can be.
Wide range of emotions go into that. And, it's not always compassion that's the right thing to do, but it's, from the starting point of being that space, or what that emotion brings to you as an individual, to hear it out, to feel it out. I did a little crazy thing when I was with the Bolts. There's a guy that, I forget the name of this quarterback from the Notre Dame that was drafted by the Seattle Seahawks back in the 90s. And he couldn't get the signals from the sideline interpreted through the headsets or whatever they have. But if they gave him a signal from the sideline, he was great. He had visual but not auditory skills. And this guy came in and made that realization for them. And he was a known person to me because he'd done some things with Olympics, individual athletes. So I brought him out and spent some time with him. And it was called CAT, Knowing Awareness Training is what it was called, KAT. So anyway, we went through this process about, different types of brain, et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately, both myself, my trainer, and a couple players went through this thing. And one of the things that we found out about Scottie Pippen, who had just gone through a series in Seattle in the 95-96 series, where he'd gone like 2 for 11 from the free throw line in a closeout game, and was just, angry at himself about missing when he missed and get angry and whatever. But anyway, went through this knowing awareness training with him. And what the remedy is for one of my other players, who was a big old compassionate guy, and Luke Longley, would go over and touch him. All he needed was a touch to drop that jawline, relax himself, and go back to the line and make a free throw. Just that simple. That it was just about a touch. And it was, just being able to understand, I'm not alone in this, or whatever it is that was in that moment.
I reading Sacred Hoops recently, learning about the way in which you found Bill Cartwright and made him a co-captain to balance out Michael Jordan and influence that team is incredible. And from a distance, having watched your Bulls teams when I was in Denver or wherever else I was, I'm looking there and going, I don't understand Bill Cartwright's role in all this. His role was as important as anything because it was so foundational to the chemistry, to the compassion that was infused in your tribe. So I think it's very cool. Yeah. This conversation could go on for days if we let it, but unfortunately, Coach Jackson needs to be elsewhere. Any wrap-up thoughts from you, Coby?
Yeah, no, I just I'm happy you brought up that story about the CBA player. It's actually something I embrace about my job, is being there with our players when we have to let them go, and I give you credit for that, because I know you remember when I was my second year after my rookie season I spent with you guys, the day before the next season started, I made the long walk up to your Mitch Kupchak's office to get cut, and you were in that office with Mitch, and you guys gave me space. You gave me space to be who I was, and I lost it. I was hysterically crying and could barely breathe, could barely talk. But that impacted my life very deeply, because you guys didn't avoid it. You didn't try to make it softer. You guys were there with me, and so I appreciate you sharing that. That was very compassionate, and like you said, it's just that touch. And sometimes it made me, while I was pissed off, and I didn't know where my life was going after that, or felt like it was spiraling out of control. You showed me what leadership can be. And so it's funny to hear you tell that story, but I appreciate that space that you provided for me, and then the relationship that it's garnered since then.
Thanks, Coby.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you guys very much. This was very special.
All right.
On behalf of Coach Jackson and Coby Karl, it's Brett Goldberg. You've been listening to The Curious Leader with Coby Karl. We look forward to having you join us on another episode of our show very soon. Take care.
The most important thing that kids and people want from us is that we care about them as a person, and to teach them that you do not have your self-worth connected to your skill level in something. They're two separate issues. You're a beautiful human being, you're fantastic, and that's it, and that's all that matters. It doesn't matter if you're ranked, number 250,000 in the world or number 1, that does not matter.
Yes, there are expectations. Yes, there are great demands. But yes, we realize you're a human being.
A lot of times what they need is love and just a positive reinforcement.
This is something we all are in together as a family.
If you can be positive about what they're doing out there, they will listen.
I can get far more out of my players if I'm doing it with a smile on my face, with energy in my voice. I'm being clear in what I want from them, and I'm letting them know that I believe in them.
being positive on a daily basis. You have a choice. You make a choice of, the glass is half full or the glass is half empty. You make a choice of bringing negative or positive to a meeting, to a relationship, to a basketball court, or to you.
PCA is one of the greatest organizations that I've ever been affiliated with.
I think having fun creates good team chemistry.
I get a better response, better effort.
We're going to be in their corner. We're going to be supportive.
Because I am demonstrating through my positivity, my joy, my excitement, that I believe in them.
It is crucial for coaches to send that message.
Every moment is a teaching moment.
You can help a child or a person believe in themselves. It's everything.